The silence was deafening that morning. Not the peaceful kind of silence you might expect in the early hours before dawn, but the heavy, suffocating silence that comes after destruction has torn through a place where life once thrived. I stood there, staring at what remained of the old apartment building on Maple Street, my breath forming small clouds in the cold October air. The demolition crew had finished their work 3 days ago, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of concrete, twisted metal, and broken dreams. But it was the sound that haunted me, a sound so faint, so desperate, that most people would have dismissed it as the wind whistling through the debris. Most people would have walked away. Most people weren't me. Most people weren't carrying the weight of living on these streets for the past 2 years, learning to hear the things others couldn't, learning to notice what others ignored. Because when you have nothing, when society has forgotten you exist, you develop a different kind of awareness. You become attuned to suffering because you know it so intimately yourself. I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now? And which city or state are you watching from? My name is Marcus, and I used to be someone else entirely. I used to wear suits and carry briefcases and worry about mortgage payments and quarterly reports. I used to have a wife named Sarah who made the best apple pie in our neighborhood, and a golden retriever named Buddy who would fetch tennis balls until his tongue hung out like a pink flag of exhaustion. I used to believe that hard work and good intentions were enough to keep your world from crumbling beneath your feet. That was before the factory closed, before the medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatment drained our savings, before the foreclosure notice appeared on our door like a death sentence written in legal jargon, before Sarah lost her battle on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, leaving me alone in a world that suddenly made no sense at all. The streets became my home 2 years ago, not by choice but by circumstance. The downtown area near the industrial district became my territory, a maze of abandoned buildings, construction sites, and forgotten corners where a man could exist without constantly being told he didn't belong. I learned to find shelter in doorways, to make meals from the kindness of strangers and the occasional generosity of restaurant owners who looked the other way when I appeared at their back doors. But most importantly, I learned to pay attention to the things others overlooked. The elderly woman who always walked the same route at 3 p.m., looking increasingly frail each day. The teenager who sat alone on the bus stop bench every morning, staring at his phone with tears in his eyes. The stray animals that wandered these forgotten neighborhoods, searching for food, warmth, and the basic kindness that seemed to be in such short supply. Animals were drawn to me somehow. Maybe they recognized a fellow outcast. Maybe they sensed that I understood what it meant to be invisible, to be seen as a problem rather than a living being deserving of compassion. Over the months, I had become an unofficial caretaker to a small community of strays. There was Chester, an old tomcat with one eye and a purr that sounded like a broken engine. There was Luna, a beautiful gray tabby who was pregnant when I found her, and who now had 3 kittens hidden in an abandoned car 2 blocks away. There was Rex, a mixed-breed dog who had clearly once belonged to someone who loved him, based on his gentle nature and the way he still waited hopefully whenever he heard footsteps approaching. I fed them when I could, shared my own meager meals, and tried to provide whatever comfort was possible in our harsh urban wilderness. They gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. They reminded me that caring for others, even in the smallest ways, was what kept us human. It was a Thursday morning when I heard the sound. I had spent the night in an alcove behind the grocery store 3 blocks from the demolition site, huddled in my sleeping bag with Rex pressed against my side for warmth. The October air had turned bitter overnight, and frost covered the pavement like nature's warning that winter was approaching fast. I was making my usual morning rounds, checking on my animal friends when I passed the rubble pile that had once been the Maple Street apartments. The building had been condemned for months before they finally tore it down, and I knew it had been home to several stray cats who had found ways to slip inside through broken windows and loose boards. I had worried about them during the demolition, but the construction crew had assured me they had done sweeps to make sure no animals were inside. That's when I heard it. A sound so soft it might have been my imagination, but so desperate it made my chest tighten with recognition. It was the cry of an animal in distress, muffled and weak, coming from somewhere deep within the pile of debris. I stopped walking and listened harder. The sound came again, barely audible above the distant hum of morning traffic. It was definitely a cat, and it was definitely in trouble. My heart began to race as I approached the rubble pile. The debris was stacked at least 15 feet high in some places, a chaotic mountain of broken concrete, snapped wooden beams, twisted metal pipes, and chunks of drywall. It looked unstable and dangerous, the kind of place where one wrong step could trigger an avalanche of heavy materials. But the crying continued, and with each faint meow, I felt my resolve strengthening. Somewhere in that mess was a living creature who needed help, and I was the only one who seemed to hear them. I began to circle the pile slowly, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The crying was sporadic now, weaker than before, as if the animal was conserving what little energy they had left. It seemed to be coming from the northwest corner, where a large section of exterior wall had collapsed inward, creating a cave-like space beneath the rubble. The rescue attempt. Emotional tension. Getting closer, I could see small gaps between the pieces of debris, spaces where air and sound could travel, but where no human could fit. I got down on my hands and knees, pressing my ear to the cold concrete, and called out softly, "Hello there, baby. I'm here. Can you hear me?" The response was immediate, a series of weak but definitely purposeful meows coming from what seemed like several feet below the surface. The sound sent chills down my spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that this animal had been trapped here for days, possibly since the demolition began. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the largest gap I could find. The beam revealed a complex maze of debris with pockets of space where pieces of concrete and metal had landed against each other, creating small caverns. And there, deep in the shadows, I caught a glimpse of two glowing eyes reflecting back at me. The eyes were bright green, beautiful and terrified, belonging to what appeared to be a small cat with orange and white markings. Even from this distance, I could see that the animal was injured. There was blood matted in their fur, and they were lying in an awkward position that suggested they couldn't move properly. My heart broke looking at those eyes. They held the same expression I had seen in my own reflection during my darkest moments on the streets. The look of someone who had been forgotten by the world, who had given up hope of rescue, but who still held on to the tiniest flame of life simply because they didn't know how to let go. "I'm going to get you out of there," I whispered into the gap. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you I'm not leaving you here." The cat responded with a soft meow that sounded almost like relief, as if they understood that help had finally arrived. But looking at the massive pile of debris, I felt overwhelmed by the impossibility of the task ahead. I had no tools, no equipment, no construction experience. I was just one man with limited resources, facing a rescue operation that would challenge a professional team with heavy machinery. I spent the next hour carefully examining the rubble pile, looking for any safe way to create an opening large enough for the cat to escape through. Every piece of debris was connected to others in a delicate balance. Moving the wrong piece could cause a collapse that would crush the trapped animal or bury them even deeper. The temperature was dropping, and I could see my breath more clearly now. I thought about the cat, injured and trapped in that cold, dark space, and I knew that time was running out. Each hour that passed made their survival less likely. I realized I couldn't do this alone. For the first time in months, I was going to have to ask for help from the very society that had made me invisible. It went against every instinct I had developed for self-preservation, but the cat's life was more important than my pride or my fear of rejection. I started with the obvious choice. I called 911 and explained the situation to the dispatcher. She was polite but told me that animal control would need to handle the situation and they wouldn't be available until Monday morning. It was Thursday. The cat wouldn't survive until Monday. I called the fire department directly. They told me that unless there was immediate danger to human life, they couldn't justify using their resources for an animal rescue, especially one that would require extensive excavation. I called every animal rescue organization in the phone book. Most went straight to voicemail. The ones that answered explained that they didn't have the equipment or personnel to handle this type of emergency rescue. With each rejection, I felt my frustration growing. Here was a living creature in desperate need, and the systems that were supposed to help were failing because of bureaucracy, limited resources, and the simple fact that one small cat's life wasn't considered worth the effort. But I wasn't ready to give up. If official channels wouldn't help, I would find another way. I walked to the nearest coffee shop, where I knew the morning regulars gathered. These were working people, folks who lived in the neighborhood and cared about their community. I swallowed my pride and approached a table where three construction workers were having breakfast before their shift. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky with nervousness. "I know I don't look like much, but there's a cat trapped in the rubble pile on Maple Street, and I need help getting them out." The men looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. I could see them taking in my appearance, the worn clothes, the unkempt hair, the obvious signs that I was homeless. I waited for the dismissal, the polite but firm suggestion that I move along. Instead, the oldest of the three, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, asked me to sit down and explain what I had found. His name was Tony, and he had been working construction for 30 years. As I described the trapped cat and the structure of the debris pile, I watched his expression change from skepticism to genuine concern. He asked detailed questions about the type of materials involved, the stability of the pile, and the exact location where I had seen the animal. After I finished explaining, Tony was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to his companions and said something that restored my faith in human nature. "Well, boys, looks like we're starting our day with a rescue operation." Within an hour, Tony had assembled an unlikely rescue team. There was his regular crew, Mike and Danny, both experienced in demolition and excavation work. There was Maria, a veterinarian from the clinic down the street who had heard about our situation and brought a medical kit specifically designed for emergency animal treatment. There was Janet, an older woman who ran the local pet supply store and had arrived with blankets, a carrier, and various supplies we might need. But most surprising of all was the arrival of Carlos, a man I recognized from the homeless community. He was older than me, probably in his 60s, with hands scarred from years of manual labor and eyes that had seen more hardship than most people could imagine. I had spoken to him occasionally over the past months, sharing information about safe sleeping spots and places to find meals. "I heard you were trying to save a cat," Carlos said as he approached our group. "I don't have money or tools, but I've got experience with rescue work from my time in the Army. And I've got time. That's got to count for something." Tony looked at Carlos, then at me, and nodded with respect. Experience and time count for a lot. We can use all the help we can get. As our group gathered around the rubble pile, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like I belonged to something larger than myself. These people, who had every reason to walk away from a complicated situation involving a homeless man and a trapped cat, had instead chosen to come together for the simple purpose of saving a life. Tony took charge of the operation with the natural authority of someone who had managed construction sites for decades. He explained that we would need to work slowly and methodically, removing debris piece by piece while constantly monitoring the stability of the pile. One person would maintain visual contact with the cat at all times, watching for any signs of distress or shifting in their position. Maria, the veterinarian, explained the medical challenges we might face. The cat had been trapped for at least 3 days, possibly longer. They would likely be dehydrated, possibly suffering from hypothermia, and potentially having sustained serious injuries from falling debris. She warned us that even if we successfully extracted the animal, their survival was far from guaranteed. But none of this discouraged our team. If anything, it seemed to strengthen their resolve. The rescue operation began with Carlos and me acting as spotters, maintaining visual contact with the cat through the gaps in the debris, while Tony, Mike, and Danny began the careful process of removing the outer layers of rubble. Every piece had to be evaluated before it was moved. Tony would examine how each chunk of concrete or length of rebar connected to the surrounding materials, determining whether its removal would cause a dangerous shift in the pile. The work was painstakingly slow. In the first hour, we managed to remove only a few pieces from the outer edge, creating a slightly larger gap, but making little progress toward reaching the trapped animal. I could see the cat more clearly now, and my heart ached at what I observed. The cat was definitely injured. Their left front leg appeared to be trapped under a piece of concrete, and there were visible cuts on their face and sides where debris had scraped against their fur. But what struck me most was their eyes. Despite the pain and fear they must have been experiencing, those green eyes remained alert and focused on our rescue efforts. There was still fight left in this little creature. I kept up a constant stream of gentle conversation, speaking to the cat in soft tones to let them know they weren't alone. I told them about my other animal friends, about the warm shelter we would find for them once they were free, about the good food and medical care that waited on the other side of this ordeal. The cat responded to my voice, occasionally offering weak meows that seemed to acknowledge my presence. It was clear that they understood something important was happening, that these humans meant help rather than harm. As the morning wore on, more people began to gather. Word had spread through the neighborhood about our rescue operation, and a small crowd of onlookers had assembled at a safe distance from the debris pile. Some had brought coffee and sandwiches for our rescue team. Others offered encouragement and asked if there was anything they could do to help. I noticed several children in the crowd, their faces pressed against their parents' legs as they watched our progress with wide eyes. One little girl, probably about 6 years old, approached me during one of our breaks. "Mister," she said, in a voice so small I had to kneel down to hear her properly. "Is the kitty going to be okay?" I looked into her concerned face and saw the same compassion that had driven all of us to spend our day attempting this rescue. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Kitty is okay," I promised her. "And I've got some pretty amazing helpers here." She nodded solemnly and returned to her mother's side, but continued to watch our work with intense concentration. By early afternoon, we had made significant progress. Tony's methodical approach had allowed us to remove a substantial amount of debris while maintaining the structural integrity of the remaining pile. We had created a narrow tunnel that extended about 8 feet into the rubble, bringing us much closer to the trapped cat. But we had also reached a critical juncture. The next layer of debris included several large concrete slabs that were supporting much of the weight above them. Moving them would be extremely dangerous, requiring careful planning and potentially some heavy equipment that we didn't have access to. Tony called for a team meeting to assess our options. We huddled together away from the debris pile, speaking in low voices so the gathered crowd couldn't hear our concerns. "I'm not going to lie to you folks," Tony said, his expression serious. "We're at a point where the next moves could either free the cat or cause a collapse that could bury them completely. I can see a way forward, but it's going to require some risks." He explained that there was one particular concrete slab that, if removed carefully, would open up a clear path to the trapped animal. But the slab was supporting several other pieces of debris, and removing it would require 2 people to work in the confined space of the tunnel we had created, one to stabilize the surrounding materials while the other lifted the slab out. The risk was obvious. If something went wrong, the people in the tunnel could be buried along with the cat we were trying to save. I'll do it, I said without hesitation. I'll go into the tunnel. Tony shook his head. Marcus, I appreciate your dedication, but you don't have the experience for this kind of work. If we're going to take this risk, it needs to be someone who knows how to read the signs if things start to go wrong. I'll go, Carlos said quietly. I've done this before, in different circumstances, and if something happens to me, well, I've had a good life. That cat deserves a chance at theirs. The weight of his words settled over our group like a heavy blanket. Here was a man that society had forgotten, offering to risk his life to save an animal that most people would consider disposable. It was a moment that revealed the true character of the human heart, stripped of all the superficial measures by which we usually judge each other's worth. Maria, the veterinarian, spoke up. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Carlos, I want you to wear this safety harness, and we'll tie a rope to you so we can pull you out quickly if needed. And I'll be positioned at the entrance to the tunnel so I can assess the cat's condition the moment we have access. The next hour was the most tense of the entire operation. Carlos crawled into the tunnel we had created, moving slowly and carefully as he made his way toward the trapped cat. Tony positioned himself at the tunnel entrance, ready to provide guidance and support. The rest of us maintained absolute silence, listening for any sounds that might indicate a dangerous shift in the debris pile. I positioned myself where I could still maintain visual contact with the cat through a side gap in the rubble. As Carlos got closer, I could see the animal's reaction. Their ears perked up at the sound of approaching help, and they began to meow more frequently, as if calling out to their rescuer. Easy there, kitty, I heard Carlos say from deep within the tunnel. I'm here to help you, but I need you to stay very still while I figure out how to get you free. What followed was a careful assessment of the cat's situation. Carlos reported that the animal's left front leg was indeed pinned under a piece of concrete, but not crushed. The leg appeared to be intact, just trapped. The cat was also dehydrated and weak, but conscious and responsive. The concrete piece that's trapping the leg isn't too heavy, Carlos called out. I think I can lift it enough for the cat to pull free, but I'll need someone to help guide them out once they're loose. I'm small enough to fit through the tunnel, I said. Let me come in and help. Tony looked at me for a moment, clearly weighing the risks of having two people in the unstable space. Finally, he nodded. Be careful, and if Carlos tells you to get out, you move fast. No heroics. Crawling through that tunnel was like entering another world. The space was cramped and dark, filled with the smell of dust and concrete. Every sound was amplified. My own breathing seemed thunderously loud, and I could hear the subtle creaks and groans of the debris pile settling around us. When I finally reached Carlos and the trapped cat, I was struck by how small and vulnerable the animal looked in this harsh environment. They were a beautiful orange tabby, with white markings on their chest and paws, probably young, maybe a year or two old. Despite their obvious pain and exhaustion, they looked up at me with those bright green eyes that seemed to hold a mix of fear and hope. Hello, beautiful, I whispered, extending my hand slowly so they could catch my scent. We're going to get you out of here. The cat sniffed my fingers and then amazingly began to purr. It was a weak, raspy sound, but it was definitely a purr. Even in this terrible situation, this little creature was expressing gratitude for human contact and kindness. Carlos had positioned himself behind the concrete slab that was pinning the cat's leg. On my count, he said, I'm going to lift this up. When I do, you need to gently pull the cat toward you and guide them toward the tunnel entrance. Ready? I positioned myself carefully, preparing to receive the cat. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Carlos lifted the concrete slab, and I watched as the cat's leg came free. They immediately tried to stand, but their injured leg wouldn't support their weight. I gently scooped them up, feeling how light they were, how their tiny body trembled with exhaustion and pain. Got them, I called out. We're coming out. The journey back through the tunnel felt both eternal and instantaneous. I cradled the cat against my chest, feeling their rapid heartbeat and shallow breathing. They had stopped purring, conserving their energy for survival, but they made no attempt to struggle or escape from my arms. When we finally emerged from the tunnel, the small crowd that had gathered erupted in spontaneous applause. I felt overwhelmed by the moment, the relief of having successfully completed the rescue, the weight of the small life in my arms, the unexpected warmth of being surrounded by people who cared about the same things I cared about. Maria immediately took charge of the cat's medical care. She had set up a makeshift examination area on a blanket spread across the hood of her car, equipped with medical supplies and a portable heat source to help combat hypothermia. Her examination revealed that while the cat was indeed dehydrated and had sustained several cuts and bruises, the injuries were not life-threatening. The left front leg that had been trapped showed signs of strain but no fractures. Most importantly, the cat was alert and responsive, suggesting that there was no serious head trauma or internal injuries. "This little one is a fighter," Maria announced to our group. "With proper care, fluids, and some time to heal, they should make a full recovery." She administered subcutaneous fluids to address the dehydration and cleaned and treated the various cuts and scrapes. The cat tolerated the medical attention with remarkable patience, as if they understood that these procedures were meant to help rather than harm. As Maria worked, Janet from the pet store had prepared a comfortable carrier lined with soft blankets and equipped with a small heating pad. The plan was to transport the cat to Maria's veterinary clinic for more comprehensive treatment and monitoring. But first, there was something I needed to do. I approached the examination area where the cat was resting in the carrier, their green eyes now more alert and focused than they had been during the rescue. They looked up at me as I knelt down next to the carrier, and I was struck again by the intelligence and awareness in their gaze. "You need a name," I said softly. "After everything you've been through, after showing such courage and determination to survive, you deserve a name that reflects your strength." I thought about the past few hours, about the community that had come together to save this small life, about the way hope could emerge from the most desperate circumstances. I thought about how this cat had called out from the darkness, refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. "Hope," I said finally. "Your name is Hope because that's what you gave us today. You reminded us that every life matters, that it's worth fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible." The cat, Hope, responded with a soft meow that sounded almost like agreement. Maria smiled as she secured the carrier for transport. "Hope is a perfect name. And Marcus, you should know that Hope is going to need someone to help with their recovery over the next few weeks. Someone who understands what they've been through. Someone they trust. Would you be interested in fostering Hope while they heal?" The question caught me off guard. I looked down at my worn clothes, thought about my unstable living situation, my limited resources. "I'm homeless," I said quietly. "I don't have a place where I could properly care for a cat." Janet, who had been listening to our conversation, stepped forward. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. I live alone in a small apartment above my pet store, and I've got more space than I need. Marcus, if you're willing to help care for Hope during their recovery, you're welcome to stay in my spare room. Consider it payment for helping to save their life." I stared at her, unable to process what she was offering. A roof over my head, a chance to care for Hope during their healing process, an opportunity to be part of something positive and meaningful. It felt too good to be true. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Completely serious," Janet replied. "I've been watching you today, seeing how much you care about animals, how hard you fought to save Hope. My store could use someone with that kind of compassion, and Hope could use someone who understands what it's like to survive difficult circumstances. That evening, I found myself in a situation I hadn't experienced in over 2 years. I was sitting in a comfortable chair in Janet's small apartment, watching Hope sleep peacefully in a soft bed positioned near a window where they could see the street below. The cat had eaten a small meal of high quality food and had been given pain medication to help with their recovery. Their breathing was steady and calm, no longer the shallow, labored breathing I had observed during the rescue. The apartment was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the cold, noisy streets where I had been living. Janet had shown me to a small but comfortable room with a real bed, clean sheets, and a window that looked out onto a tree-lined side street. She had also provided me with towels and toiletries, suggesting that I might want to take a shower and get some rest after the emotional intensity of the day. As I sat there watching Hope sleep, I reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought us both to this moment. 24 hours ago, I had been just another invisible person living on the margins of society. Hope had been a forgotten animal trapped in a pile of debris with no apparent hope of rescue. Now we were both safe, warm, and cared for, surrounded by people who had demonstrated that compassion and community could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. But more than that, I felt something stirring inside me that I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. I felt purpose. I felt useful. I felt like my life had meaning beyond just survival. Janet appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to me and settled into the chair across from where I was sitting. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentle with genuine concern. "Overwhelmed," I answered honestly. "Grateful. Confused. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." Janet smiled. "It's not a dream. Sometimes good things happen to good people, even when those people have forgotten that they're good." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our tea and watching Hope sleep. The cat occasionally twitched their whiskers or moved their paws, as if they were dreaming about running through fields instead of being trapped under rubble. Over the next several weeks, I settled into a routine that felt both foreign and natural. My days began early, checking on Hope's condition and helping with their medical care. Maria had provided detailed instructions for administering medications, monitoring the healing process, and gradually increasing Hope's activity level as their strength returned. Hope proved to be a remarkable patient. They seemed to understand that the humans around them were trying to help, and they cooperated with treatments and examinations with unusual patience for a cat who had experienced trauma. Their personality began to emerge as they healed, playful but gentle, curious but cautious, affectionate but not demanding. In the afternoons, I helped Janet in the pet store, learning about animal care, inventory management, and customer service. I discovered that I had a natural ability to connect with both the animals and the people who came into the store. My experiences on the streets had taught me to read body language and emotional cues, skills that proved valuable when helping customers choose the right products for their pets, or when calming nervous animals during grooming appointments. But most importantly, I was learning to reconnect with Hope itself. Each day that Hope grew stronger, each small milestone in their recovery reminded me that healing was possible even after the most devastating experiences. The story of Hope's rescue had spread throughout the neighborhood, creating an unexpected network of people who checked in regularly on our progress. Tony and his construction crew stopped by the pet store every few days to see how Hope was doing and to share updates on their own animal rescue efforts. They had been inspired by our success and had begun volunteering with local animal rescue organizations. Maria had become not just Hope's veterinarian, but a trusted friend who provided guidance on both animal care and rebuilding human connections. She introduced me to other people in the community who shared our passion for animal welfare, expanding my social circle beyond the isolation I had experienced on the streets. Carlos had become a regular visitor as well, often arriving with stories about other animals he had encountered who needed help. Together, we had begun developing an informal network to address the needs of stray and abandoned animals in our area. Carlos's street knowledge combined with my growing understanding of animal care and Janet's resources created an effective team for identifying and addressing animal welfare issues. The little girl who had asked me about Hope's well being during the rescue had become one of our most faithful visitors. Her name was Emma, and she would arrive at the pet store every Saturday morning with her mother, bringing small toys and treats for Hope and asking detailed questions about their recovery process. Her genuine concern and excitement about Hope's progress reminded me daily why this work mattered. By the end of November, Hope had made a complete physical recovery. Their injured leg had healed perfectly, showing no signs of lasting damage. The cuts and scrapes had disappeared, leaving behind a beautiful coat of orange and white fur that gleamed with health. They had gained weight and muscle tone, transforming from the emaciated, frightened animal we had pulled from the rubble into a confident, playful cat who seemed to embrace each day with enthusiasm. But Hope's emotional recovery was perhaps even more remarkable. Despite the trauma they had experienced, they showed no fear of humans or reluctance to explore new environments. They seemed to understand that they were safe now, that the people around them could be trusted to provide care and protection. Hope had also developed a special bond with me that went beyond the typical pet owner relationship. They seemed to sense that we had both survived difficult circumstances, that we understood each other's journey from desperation to hope. They would often seek me out when they were tired or uncertain, curling up next to me with a purr that had grown strong and steady. As winter approached, Janet and I had many conversations about the future. My position helping in the pet store had evolved into something more substantial. She had offered me a permanent job with a salary that would allow me to rent a small apartment nearby. I would continue living above the store for now, but the option of independence was there when I felt ready for it. More importantly, the work had given me a sense of purpose that I had thought was lost forever. I was good at this, caring for animals, helping customers, building relationships within the community. I had found a way to use my experiences, even the painful ones, to make a positive difference in the world. Hope had officially become my cat, though the adoption felt more like a recognition of a bond that had already formed. We were partners now, survivors who had found each other at exactly the right moment. One cold December morning, I received a call that would complete the circle of our story. A woman had found an injured dog under a highway overpass and didn't know what to do. The animal was trapped in a drainage pipe, conscious but unable to move, and the local authorities had said they couldn't respond until the following week. The situation was heartbreakingly familiar. An animal in desperate need, bureaucratic obstacles, and a compassionate person who refused to accept that nothing could be done. "I'll be right there," I told the woman, "and I'll bring help." Within an hour, I had assembled a rescue team that included Tony and his crew, Maria with her medical supplies, Carlos with his rescue experience, and Janet with whatever equipment we might need. We also brought Hope, who had become something of a mascot for our informal animal rescue operations. The rescue took most of the day, but we successfully extracted a German Shepherd mix who had apparently been hit by a car and had crawled into the drainage pipe seeking shelter. Like Hope, the dog was injured but alive, frightened but responsive to gentle treatment. As we transported the dog to Maria's clinic for treatment, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from turning personal pain into purposeful action. My experiences on the streets, the desperation and invisibility I had endured, had prepared me for this work in ways that no formal training could have provided. That evening, as I sat in the apartment above the pet store with Hope curled up on my lap, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 8 months ago, I had been a broken man living on the streets, convinced that my life had no value or purpose. Hope had been a nameless stray, forgotten by the world, and trapped in what seemed like a hopeless situation. But sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the simplest act of refusing to give up. Sometimes salvation comes not from dramatic gestures or grand plans, but from the quiet decision to pay attention to suffering and to respond with whatever resources we have available. Hope purred contentedly as I stroked their soft fur, and I realized that their name had become prophetic in ways I never could have imagined. They had given me hope when I needed it most, but more than that, they had shown me that hope is not a passive emotion. Hope is active. Hope is the decision to keep fighting even when the situation seems impossible. Hope is the choice to believe that things can get better and then to work toward making that belief a reality. Our animal rescue network had grown throughout the winter, expanding from our small core group to include dozens of volunteers from throughout the city. We had successfully rescued and rehabilitated more than 30 animals, finding homes for most, and providing ongoing care for those with special needs. But the impact went beyond just the animals we had saved. The humans involved in our rescue operations had formed genuine friendships and support networks. Tony's construction crew had begun volunteering regularly with habitat restoration projects. Maria had started offering free veterinary clinics for low-income pet owners. Carlos had been hired as a consultant by the city's animal control department, bringing his street knowledge and rescue experience to official operations. Janet's pet store had become an unofficial community center for animal lovers, a place where people could share resources, coordinate rescue efforts, and simply connect with others who understood that animal welfare was inseparable from human compassion. I had been invited to speak at local schools and community groups about animal rescue and homelessness, sharing the story of Hope's rescue and the lessons I had learned about the connections between all forms of vulnerability and resilience. On a warm day in early spring, exactly 1 year after Hope's rescue, we organized a celebration at the site where the Maple Street apartments had once stood. The lot had been cleared and landscaped, transformed into a small neighborhood park with benches, walking paths, and a playground for children. More than 100 people attended the gathering, including many who had been involved in Hope's rescue and recovery, as well as families whose pets had been helped by our growing rescue network. Hope was there too, healthy and confident, wearing a small harness and enjoying the attention from admiring visitors. Emma, the little girl who had asked about Hope's well-being during the original rescue, had organized a fundraiser at her school that raised enough money to install a small memorial plaque in the park. The plaque read, "In honor of Hope and all the forgotten animals who remind us that every life has value and every act of compassion matters." As I stood in that space where Hope had once been trapped and dying, surrounded by the community that had formed around the simple decision to save one small life, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not the kind of completion that comes from ending something, but the kind that comes from understanding that every ending is also a beginning. Hope is 3 years old now, healthy and happy, still living with me in the small apartment I eventually rented near Janet's pet store. They have become something of a celebrity in our neighborhood, known for their friendly personality and their role in inspiring our local animal rescue efforts. I continue to work with animals and their human families, having completed certification as a veterinary assistant and animal behavior specialist. The skills I learned during my time on the streets, observation, patience, the ability to remain calm in crisis situations, have proven invaluable in this work. But perhaps most importantly, I have learned that redemption is not a destination, but a daily practice. Every morning when I wake up and see Hope sleeping peacefully in the sunshine streaming through our window, I am reminded that healing is possible, that communities can form around shared compassion, and that the most meaningful work often begins with simply paying attention to those who have been overlooked. The story of Hope's rescue has been shared far beyond our small neighborhood. Local media covered our growing rescue network, and our story has inspired similar community-based animal welfare initiatives in other cities. I receive emails and letters from people around the country who have been motivated to start their own rescue efforts or to volunteer with existing animal welfare organizations. But the impact that matters most to me is the one I see every day in my own community. Children who learned about Hope's story are growing up with a deeper understanding of animal welfare and social responsibility. Adults who participated in rescue operations have developed lasting friendships and support networks. People who once might have walked past a stray animal now stop to help or call our rescue network. Hope themselves continues to be an ambassador for the forgotten and overlooked. They accompany me to schools and community events, demonstrating through their gentle, trusting nature that trauma can be overcome, that healing is possible, and that love can flourish even after the darkest experiences. As I write this story, Hope is sleeping next to me on the couch, occasionally twitching their whiskers as they dream about whatever adventures occupy the minds of contented cats. The scars from their ordeal have long since disappeared, but the lessons they taught us about resilience, community, and the power of refusing to give up continue to shape our daily lives. I think about that morning when I first heard their cries coming from the rubble pile, when I made the decision to pay attention instead of walking away. I had no way of knowing that choosing to help one small, forgotten creature would transform not just their life, but my own, and ultimately touch the lives of hundreds of other animals and humans. The promise I made to Hope in that dark space under the debris, that I wouldn't leave them there, that I would find a way to help, has become the guiding principle of my life. It reminds me every day that hope is not just something we feel, but something we do. Hope is the action we take when we choose to believe that things can get better and then commit ourselves to making that belief a reality. Tonight, as I look at Hope sleeping peacefully in the warm light of our home, I know that some promises are worth keeping, no matter the cost. Some lives are worth fighting for, even when the world tells us they don't matter. And sometimes, the act of saving someone else becomes the moment when we discover that we ourselves have been saved. The silence is peaceful now, not the heavy silence of destruction and abandonment, but the gentle silence of contentment and belonging. Hope is home. We both are. And in a world that often seems overwhelming in its complexity and cruelty, that simple truth that home is possible for all of us feels like the most important victory of all.